The morning of December 7th, 1941, begins in silence. Then, it splits open. Above Pearl Harbor, the first wave of Japanese aircraft descends through broken cloud. They come in tight formations, engines screaming, wings glinting in the early sun. Below them, the American Pacific Fleet lies anchored in rows, orderly, vulnerable, unaware. The first bomb falls at 7:55 a.m. Within minutes, Battleship Row is a wall of fire. The USS Arizona explodes with such force that men a mile away feel the shockwave in their chests. The Oklahoma rolls over, trapping hundreds inside. Oil spreads across the harbor, igniting into black smoke that blots out the sky. Japanese pilots circle overhead, selecting targets at will. They strafe, they bomb, they leave, and the American ships cannot stop them. Not effectively, not in time, not in any way that matters. This is the central contradiction of December 7th. The United States Navy is the largest in the world. It has guns, it has planes, it has men trained to fight, but it cannot reliably defend itself against an air attack. The Japanese strike with near impunity, and when they finally withdraw, it is not because they were driven off, it is because they chose to leave. This is not a story about cowardice. It is a story about confusion, and confusion, in war, kills just as efficiently as bullets. By early 1942, the Pacific War has begun in earnest, and Japan holds the initiative everywhere that matters. The Philippines fall. Malaya falls. Singapore, the great British fortress, falls in a single week. Japanese forces sweep south and east, seizing islands, oil fields, airstrips. American forces retreat, regroup, and try to hold a shrinking perimeter. The U.S. Navy, still reeling from Pearl Harbor, is tasked with stopping an enemy that moves faster, strikes harder, and seems always one step ahead. But the Navy itself is not ready for this kind of war. It was built around battleships, massive, armored, floating fortresses designed to duel other battleships on the open sea. Air power was acknowledged, yes, but not fully integrated. Carriers were useful. Fighters were helpful. But the doctrine, the training, the reflex of command, all of it still pointed backward to the age of big guns and close-range broadsides. Air threats were underestimated. Radar was unreliable. Coordination between ships, planes, and gunners was poor. Carrier warfare was still being figured out in real time, under fire, with lives on the line. And the cost of that learning curve was measured in burning steel and drowned men. The core problem is not a lack of technology. By 1942, the U.S. Navy has radar. It has fighter planes. It has anti-aircraft guns that can shred an incoming bomber if given enough warning. The problem is that none of these systems talk to each other. They operate in isolation, blind to what the others are seeing, reacting too late or not at all. A radar operator picks up a contact 40 miles out. He reports it. But to whom? And how fast does that information travel? By the time it reaches the carrier's air officer, minutes have passed. By the time fighters are launched, more minutes. By the time those fighters climb to altitude and reach the intercept point, the enemy is already overhead, or gone, or attacking a different ship entirely. Meanwhile, anti-aircraft gunners on the ships below are firing at anything that moves. Sometimes that includes American planes. Friendly fire incidents are common. Communication between ships is slow, relayed by signal flags or radio chatter that clogs under pressure. There is no unified picture of the battle. Every ship, every fighter, every gun crew is operating on fragments of information, stitching together a guess about what is happening and where. Ships often see their attackers only in the final seconds before impact. A lookout shouts, guns swing toward the sky, tracers arc upward, and then the bomb falls or the torpedo strikes, and it is too late to matter. This is not a system. This is chaos with uniforms. Inside that chaos, human beings are trying to make sense of the war. Radar operators sit in darkened rooms, staring at glowing screens covered in blips. Some of those blips are real, some are weather, some are electromagnetic ghosts. The operators were trained for weeks, not months. They are unsure. They hesitate. They report contacts that turn out to be clouds, and they miss contacts that turn out to be death. Fighter pilots are scrambled too late, or to the wrong altitude, or toward the wrong bearing. They chase shadows. They burn fuel, circling empty ocean. By the time they find the enemy, their ammunition is half gone, and the enemy is already withdrawing. Ship captains rely on visual spotting because they do not trust the new systems. They have spent careers learning to read the sea, the wind, the horizon. Now they are being asked to trust a machine that shows them dots on a screen and a system that puts decisions in the hands of junior officers sitting in a room below deck. There is institutional resistance, not malice, just inertia. The Navy fought the last war a certain way, and that way worked. Changing it requires admitting that the old methods are no longer enough, and admitting that, in the middle of a losing war, feels dangerous. So the ships keep burning, the fighters keep arriving late, and the Japanese keep attacking. Then comes the small change. It is not a new weapon. It is not a secret technology. It is a room, the Combat Information Center. The idea is simple. Take the radar operators, the fighter controllers, and the gunnery officers, and put them in the same space. Let them see the same picture. Let them talk to each other in real time. Centralize the information. Centralize the decisions. Turn confusion into clarity, or at least try to. Initially, it is viewed as an administrative adjustment, a way to streamline communication. Nothing revolutionary, just a little more organization. But organization, it turns out, is a weapon. The Combat Information Center is installed first on a handful of ships, a cramped, dimly lit compartment filled with plotting tables, radio sets, and radar repeaters. Officers and enlisted men stand shoulder to shoulder, tracking contacts, updating positions, issuing orders. The room hums with controlled tension. Information flows in from across the task force. Radar contacts, visual sightings, altitude estimates, bearing and speed. And for the first time, someone in the Navy can see the whole picture. Not perfectly, not instantly, but faster than before. And in war, faster is everything. The first results are messy. There is confusion, overload, too much information coming in too fast. Radar contacts are misidentified, fighter directions are garbled. Gunnery orders arrive seconds too late. The men operating the system are learning on the job, improvising protocols, shouting corrections over the noise of battle. But reaction times begin to shorten. Fighters are launched earlier, vectored more accurately. They intercept enemy formations before the bombs fall, not after. Anti-aircraft guns are cued to the right sector of sky, firing at real targets instead of empty air. Ships maneuver in coordination, turning together to unmask their guns or evade torpedoes. It is not perfect. Men still die. Ships still burn. But the tempo changes. The initiative begins to shift, degree by degree, from the attackers to the defenders. And the Japanese start to notice. If you want to understand how wars are won, subscribe, because this is the part that textbooks skip. Adoption spreads across the fleet. By mid-1942, combat information centers are being installed on carriers, cruisers, even some destroyers. Doctrine is written, revised, rewritten. Training programs are established. The system becomes standardized. Every task force now has a nerve center, a place where information converges and decisions are made. During the carrier battles that follow, the impact becomes undeniable. At the Battle of the Coral Sea in May, American fighters intercept Japanese strike aircraft before they reach the carriers. Not all of them, but enough. At midway in June, radar and fighter direction help blunt the Japanese counterstrike. The defense is not airtight, but it holds long enough for American dive bombers to turn the battle. Surprise attacks become harder to execute. Japanese pilots, accustomed to finding American ships flat-footed and disorganized, now face coordinated resistance. Fighters meet them at altitude. Gunfire greets them in volume. The easy kills are gone. Coordinated fighter direction becomes standard operating procedure. The Combat Information Center is no longer experimental. It is doctrine. The enemy reacts slowly at first, then with frustration. Japanese pilots, some of the most skilled in the world, find themselves intercepted more often. Their formations are broken up before they reach the target. Their loss rates climb. The tactical advantage they held in the early months of the war begins to erode. This is not because American pilots suddenly became better overnight. It is because they are being directed better. They are arriving at the right place, at the right time, with enough fuel and ammunition to matter. The Japanese do not have an equivalent system. Their carriers rely on visual sighting and ad hoc communication. Their fighter direction is improvised. They are skilled, but they are not organized in the same way. And as the war grinds on, that difference compounds. Consider what this looks like from the cockpit of a Japanese bomber in mid-1943. You are approaching an American task force. Your training is exceptional. Your aircraft is proven. You have flown dozens of missions. But this time, before you even see the enemy ships on the horizon, American fighters are already climbing towards you, not searching, not patrolling at random, climbing directly toward your formation. They know where you are. They know your altitude. They know your heading. You try to evade. You tighten your formation. You push forward. But the fighters are already there, slashing through your bomber groups, forcing you to break apart, to jettison bombs early, to turn back or die. This was not supposed to happen. In the early days of the war, you could approach a target and expect confusion below. Delayed responses, scattered defenses. Now, the Americans are waiting for you before you arrive. It is unnerving, it is costly, and it is happening more often. By late 1942 and into 1943, the tactical balance has shifted. American task forces are harder to surprise, harder to hurt, harder to sink. The Japanese still win battles, but they pay more for them. And in a war of attrition, that matters. Every bomber that fails to reach its target is a bomber that does not sink a ship. Every fighter that intercepts a strike package is a fighter that saves American lives. The cumulative effect is strategic. Japan cannot afford to lose experienced pilots at the rate it is losing them. The Americans, with their vast training programs and industrial base, can replace losses. Japan cannot. The Combat Information Center does not win the war alone, but it shifts the equation. It forces the Japanese to fight harder for every success. It raises the cost of every attack. And over time, that cost becomes unbearable. The long-term impact of the Combat Information Center is profound. It becomes permanent. After the war, every major navy in the world adopts some version of the concept. The idea of centralized air defense, of linking sensors and shooters into a single system, becomes foundational to modern naval warfare. The British study it. The Soviets replicate it. Even navies that never fought in the Pacific understand the lesson. Information must flow to a central point where decisions can be made quickly and executed immediately. During the Cold War, American carriers operate with sophisticated CICs that integrate radar, sonar, electronic warfare, and air control. The descendants of those cramped rooms on 1942-era ships become the nerve centers of nuclear-powered supercarriers, managing hundreds of aircraft and tracking thousands of contacts across millions of square miles of ocean. The technology advances. Computers replace plotting tables. Digital displays replace grease pencils and paper charts. Satellites feed data from space. But the principle remains the same. Collect information. Understand it. Act on it faster than the enemy can. The CIC becomes the brain of the ship. In modern naval warfare, If the Combat Information Center is destroyed, the ship is effectively blind and helpless, even if its weapons are intact. That is how central the concept has become. This is not a story about a miracle weapon. It is a story about connecting what you already have. The Americans in 1942 did not need a new radar. They did not need a new fighter plane. They needed their radar operators to talk to their fighter controllers. They needed their fighter controllers to talk to their ship captains. They needed information to move faster than the enemy's bombs. And once they built the system to do that, everything changed. These stories matter. If they're worth remembering, they're worth sharing. Subscribe so they aren't forgotten. America did not win the Pacific War because it built a better bomb or a faster plane. It won because it learned under fire to see the battlefield more clearly than its enemy. The Japanese were not less brave, they were not less skilled, but they fought in a fog that the Americans, slowly, began to pierce. And once that fog lifted, even partially, the arithmetic of war changed. The Combat Information Center was not the only reason the tide turned. There were other factors: industrial capacity, code breaking, the sheer weight of resources that America could bring to bear once it fully mobilized. But the CIC mattered. It mattered in the minutes that decided whether a fighter reached an enemy bomber in time. It mattered in the seconds that determined whether a ship's guns fired at the right target or the wrong one. It mattered because war is not fought in a vacuum. It is fought in confusion, in noise, in the split-second space between seeing a threat and reacting to it. And anything that shrinks that space, even a little, saves lives. The lesson is older than radar, older than navies. It is the lesson of every battle ever fought. Victory does not always go to the side with the most firepower. Sometimes it goes to the side that understands what it is seeing. So here is the question, and it is not rhetorical. Is warfare decided more by the weapons we build, or by how well we understand what is happening when we use them? Can you win a war with inferior technology if your organization is superior? Can you lose one with superior technology if your organization is not? Pearl Harbor burned because the American Navy did not understand what was happening fast enough to stop it. 2 years later, Japanese carriers burned for the same reason. The weapon did not change. The understanding did. Think about that and ask yourself, in your own life, in your own work, in the systems you are part of, are you losing because you lack tools or because you are not connecting the ones you already have? The answer matters more than you think. If this made you think, leave a comment. These conversations matter.